Some roads take you to places you never expected. Sometimes, a single choice shapes the rest of your life. And sometimes, you don't realize you've taken the wrong step until you've already made the first move. I spent years trying to make the right choices. When I married Anderson, I was 38. Until then, I had always dreamed of building a family, of one day giving my children a loving home. But Anderson, he never shared those dreams, not at first. He made all the promises a husband should make, spoke of building a life together. But as the years passed, I realized I was nothing more than a shadow in his world. Anderson never truly valued me or the family we could have built. His work, his schedule, his rigid way of doing things, they always came first. At first, I deceived myself. Maybe he would change. Maybe, one day, he would realize the growing emptiness inside me. But he never did. Anderson never changed. He stayed the same, and with every passing year, I felt lonelier. But Drake was different. Anderson's son from his first marriage. When we met, he was 19, just starting college, ambitious and determined. Anderson always kept his distance from him, believing that being a father meant providing financially and nothing more. But Drake, he wanted more than that. He wanted to prove himself, to carve his own path. He was everything Anderson was not. And before I realized it, I had begun watching him. When Drake was about to graduate, he made a decision that changed everything. Everyone expected him to take a high-paying job in engineering. But instead, he said he wanted to become a mechanic. Anderson lost his mind when he found out, yelling, furious, even threatening to cut him off financially. I still remember the echoes of that argument shaking the walls of our home. And then, Drake left. The night after graduation, he packed his things and walked away without a word. I never got the chance to say goodbye. I never asked where he was going. Because if I let myself acknowledge the pain of watching him leave, I would have to admit something else. Something I wasn't ready to face. 2 years have passed since he left. I've only seen him a handful of times. The relationship we had, it's gone now. It was never supposed to be there in the first place. And tonight, as I sit in my broken-down car on a dark, rain-slicked road, I realize there's no one else I can call. I don't know it yet, but everything is about to change, far more than I could ever imagine. And it will happen on its own. I pick up my phone, my fingers instinctively scrolling to Anderson's number. But in just a few seconds, I hesitate. Even if he answered, wouldn't his response be obvious? Call a tow truck, Cameron. I'm too far away. He would hang up without another word. I swallow. For a few seconds, I just stare at the screen. Then, I exit the call and stop at another name. Drake. A strange, restless feeling rises in me as my finger hovers over his contact. Should I call him? Is this just a cry for help, or is it something else? Something unspoken. Something unnamed. I use this as my excuse. The rain taps lightly against the window, and then, in the glow of headlights, I see a tall, strong figure approaching through the darkness. A strange sense of relief washes over me as Drake steps closer to the car and knocks on the window. When I lower it just a bit, his voice comes, steady, familiar. Cameron, are you okay? My eyes lock onto him. His face is damp from the rain, his features sharper than I remember. His stance is effortless, but strong. No, he's not a boy anymore. He's a man now. And in these 2 years, it's not just the distance between us that has changed. He has changed. Yes, I say. It just stopped suddenly, and I don't know what to do. I admit. I was visiting my mother, and this happened on the way back. Anderson is out of town again. I didn't call him because I already know what he would say. Call a tow truck, Cameron. He might even be annoyed with me for it. If this is the first time you've heard confessions like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications before we continue. You'll find yourself wishing this story never ends. Drake tilts his head slightly, something understanding in his gaze. I know why you didn't call him, he says calmly. And don't worry, I've got this. He leans forward, pops the hood, and shines a flashlight over the engine. I watch his hands move with precision, the muscles in his arms flexing with each controlled movement. He's not a college kid anymore. Confidence shows in everything he does. Experience in the way he handles things. It's pretty clear this isn't getting fixed here, he finally says, shutting the hood. We'll have to take it to the garage. I need to test the steering, might be stiff. You'll sit in the passenger seat. I'll leave my truck here and come back for it later. I don't question it. I don't, because I know that with Drake here, somehow, everything will be okay. The air is damp during the ride, but the silence between us isn't uncomfortable. If anything, it feels like it's pulling us closer, without either of us realizing it. Drake glances at me occasionally, his voice steady as he tells me things, keeping the conversation going, filling the space between us with an easy comfort he's always had. And I listen. I watch him. The way his hands grip the wheel. The sound of his voice. His presence right beside me. When he left 2 years ago, I never admitted to myself how much his absence left a void in me. Anderson was always distant. But Drake's presence was different, his energy, his voice, his eyes. Even then, something inside me had awakened. I just wasn't ready to see it. I remember that night, the night right before he left. There was something between us. Something that never crossed the line, but could have. Maybe that possibility had always been there. And now, Drake is here again. Older, stronger, and so much more tempting. A quiet restlessness rose within me, a feeling that was forbidden, that wasn't supposed to be there, but it was. And no matter how much I tried to suppress it, I felt it in every breath when he was near. When we arrived at the garage, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as I opened the car door. But a voice inside me whispered, "Tonight, both of you are different, and both of you know it." The garage smelled of engine oil and metal, and the steady sound of rain echoed against the roof. Drake lifted his head from under the hood, wiping a thin layer of sweat from his forehead before turning to face me. His eyes didn't look tired, but there was something thoughtful in his expression. "It's late," he said in a steady, deep voice. "If I start fixing the car now, we'll be here until morning. It's better to take care of it first thing tomorrow." I nodded. No problem. But there was something about the way Drake stood there that made it clear, this wasn't just an ordinary situation. "The rain's getting heavier," he added. "Stay here. I'll go with a friend to get my truck first, then I'll come back and take you home. I don't want you out there alone." His voice carried the quiet authority of a man who noticed the little things, things Anderson never did. In this situation, Anderson wouldn't have cared. He would have expected me to handle it somehow. But Drake was different. As he walked out, the silence of the garage wrapped around me. Rain pounded on the roof while I sat down, folding my arms over my lap. Logically, I should have been frustrated or anxious. My car had broken down, I was getting home late, my plans were ruined. But strangely, I didn't care about any of it. If anything, I felt at peace. No, more than that. I felt happy. Why? This was just a car breakdown. A normal situation. But tonight, nothing about it felt normal. The way Drake looked at me. The warmth in his voice. The way he filled the space. Something inside me was shifting. As I waited, I thought about it, how, over the years, Drake had grown into a strong, independent man. But more than that, when he was around, I didn't feel lonely. And that feeling, whatever it was settling deep inside me. The sound of an engine rumbled outside, breaking through my thoughts. Drake pulled up in front of the garage, stepping inside with rain dripping from his shoulders, completely unfazed by the storm. "You ready?" he asked, his eyes locking onto mine. I stood up, pulling my coat tighter around myself, before nodding. We walked out together and got into the car. As we drove, the feeling inside me only grew stronger. I turned to look at him, searching for the right words to describe what I was feeling. "You know," I said with a small smile, "when something like this happens, most people feel frustrated, anxious, or unlucky. But I don't feel that way. In fact, strangely enough, I feel happy." Drake smiled lightly, keeping his eyes on the road. "I understand," he said. "Sometimes, even in the most unexpected moments, things just feel right." His voice was gentle, but there was something deeper in it, something that felt like the walls I had built around my loneliness were starting to crumble. And in that moment, I realized just how distant Anderson truly was. I had felt alone even when he was right beside me. And more than that, I realized Drake saw it, too. The tension between us was undeniable now. I felt an urge inside me, a quiet but persistent whisper. I didn't want tonight to end. As we got closer to my house, I took a breath, gathering my courage. "Drake, you've been dealing with all of this for hours, you must be starving," I said, trying not to look away. "Come inside. Let's have dinner, like we used to." Drake looked at me for a moment, silent, a brief hesitation. Then, that familiar warm smile. "How could I say no to that?" he said. And something inside me ignited. When we stepped inside, and I started preparing dinner in the kitchen, any tension I should have felt from the night before was gone. We laughed together, reminiscing about old memories, slipping into the ease of familiarity as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Every time our eyes met, we both knew it. And there was no going back. The soft flicker of candlelight danced across the table. We talked for a while, shared jokes like we always had. It felt effortless, so natural. But the air between us wasn't the same. Drake leaned back slightly in his chair, crossing his arms as he studied me. There was warmth in his gaze, but there was something else, too. Something playful. Something knowing. "I have to admit," he said, smiling just slightly, "you still look just as beautiful as ever. Actually, it's hard to believe, but you look younger than you did 2 years ago. If I didn't know you, I'd say, look at this. I'm 26, and this woman, she's probably 30 at most. And maybe I'd try to charm her." I laughed, the way he said it was so natural. The unexpected compliment threw me off guard, but I couldn't deny how much I liked it. "Thank you, but I'm 45, Drake," I said, still smiling. "Almost 20 years between us." "Age is just a number, Cameron," he said, his voice lower now. And we both knew his words sent a wave of heat through me. The table fell silent, not awkward, but heavy. Thick. Like something was about to break. Drake tilted his head slightly, watching me as if he was seeing something deeper, something neither of us could ignore anymore. "You've changed too," I said, finally trying to shift the conversation, even just a little. "When you left, I could tell you were starting to grow, but now, you're a man." The smile on Drake's face faded slightly, replaced by something more serious. He set his hand on the table, fingers lightly tracing the surface, hesitating for a second. Then, he looked straight into my eyes and said, "I have feelings for you." Cameron, something inside me tightened instantly. "Drake, you know," he continued, "I was never supposed to say this, but I don't want to hide anymore. When I left that house, I thought that if I respected you, if I stayed away, I would forget about it. I thought it was just something temporary, that it would fade with time, but it didn't." He took a deep breath, his gaze pulling me in, trapping me. "And now, looking at you like this, I feel something entirely different. Seeing you so lonely, it kills me inside, believe me." My heart pounded so hard it felt like my entire world had split into 2 halves. One half told me to run, the other, this unfamiliar part of me, just wanted to sit there and take in every word he was saying. "Drake, we can't." I couldn't finish my sentence because his eyes were locked onto mine, and suddenly, I couldn't breathe. Then, without thinking, my fingers reached across the table, seeking his hand. Drake took my hand, his skin warm and strong, and in that moment, everything became silent. We moved at the same time, leaning in, stealing one last look before our eyes closed, and then, our lips met. At first, it was slow, hesitant. But within seconds, everything we had suppressed, every tension we had ignored for years, came rushing out all at once. Drake cupped my face, gently, pulling me closer. My body instinctively leaned into him. The more I felt his warmth, the more I realized that something inside me, something I had lost for years, was coming back to life. And in that moment, I knew, there was no turning back. Even with Drake's lips still on mine, I could feel something awakening inside me, something I had silenced for too long. My hands moved on their own, sliding down his shoulders as he pulled me into his arms, firm and unwavering. I moved toward Drake, looking into his eyes, noticing the slow, deliberate way his hands moved. It only excited me more. I felt something deep within me, something huge, and though I felt a sharp, aching intensity in that moment, I didn't care. Everything kept building. I gasped. Drake. He was enjoying this too. I could see the excitement in his eyes. We had found each other. We were completely in sync in every way. I pressed my hands against Drake's shoulders, wondering if my nails would dig into his skin. My body was tense, trembling. I hadn't expected this reaction. I could tell, Drake liked it. I started begging him, telling him to let go, to stop holding back. And then, when he whispered my name, Cameron. His voice grew softer and softer, and finally, he gave in. A deep warmth spread through me. I took a shaky breath. I surrendered. I collapsed beside him. Lying next to Drake, my heart still pounded. Our breaths were uneven, but inside me, I felt a peace I couldn't explain. Being this close to him felt like fitting a missing piece back into place. Drake turned on his side, locking eyes with me. His fingers ran through my hair, tracing my face. There was certainty in his gaze. A look that told me this was real. That this wasn't just a temporary escape. Cameron, he said slowly, you need to leave Anderson. Something tightened inside me. I had been waiting for him to say this. But the words still hung heavy in the air. He doesn't deserve you. He never did. He left you alone for years, never showed you love, turned your life into a shadow of what it should be. You don't deserve a life like that. I tried to say something, but he didn't let me. If you do this, if you leave, we can start over. Somewhere else. A whole new country where no one knows us. I don't care about anything else. I love you, Cameron, and I can't stand watching you be sad, feeling alone anymore. I locked eyes with him. The sincerity in his voice, the desperate longing in his eyes, it shook me to my core. Warmth spread through me. Something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that this could be an escape. But also, a chance. I was staring at the possibility of happiness, happiness I had never truly known before. I took a deep breath and smiled. Drake. The words caught in my throat. But in that moment, our eyes said everything. Our hands found each other. Fingers intertwined. This story wasn't over. There was so much more to come. And this time, it was something even greater. Stay tuned for what happens next. If you've read this far, I know this story has touched you deeply. There's so much more to share, and you won't want to miss a thing. So be sure to hit follow, turn on notifications, and leave a comment about this story.